Well, good morning. It's a beautiful July morning, 6th of July, and I happen to be in Minorca, one of the lovely Balearic islands off Spain. Beautiful beaches, coves, countryside mixed, not as developed tourism wise as the other Balearic islands. In fact, a lovely place to live, and I've always enjoyed Spain. I was very sad when the leader, Bruce Hales of the Brethren, decided to close down the remaining position in Terrassa near Barcelona, Spain. Apparently that was because they weren't making enough money. I don't know why they couldn't have been supported by the richer part of the Brethren community, so they could have continued. And I did go through a lot of the suffering with the Brethren there, tried to help them in all they were going through. Massive exercise, having to relocate not only from locality because it's being closed down or your religion is moving out, but psychologically and emotionally, the trauma, especially when you're under a cloud because you're not making enough money and you've been given a limited time to make more money, and if you don't make enough money, there's a big punishment coming your way. And that is that you can't stay there because all the Brethren are moving out and your life is the Brethren. So very sad really. This happened to many localities. I also went through the whole thing with the Brethren in Hamburg. But there's many places closed down. I've been to Montego Bay in Jamaica. I feel very sorry for the victims of arbitrary decisions to move out of places because your friends are in the community or in the religion and you've not got any alternative but to move. And of course it does raise big questions as to whether the support system who are implementing this massive radical upheaval are providing the necessary psychological, financial, moral and physical support. I've been in touch with families who have had to leave South Africa and move continents right across from South Africa to Jamaica. Lovely people, but it's not easy. And of course they've been excommunicated, so they move for the religion to stay with their friends, and then they're deemed not worthy to be amongst those friends that they move with, and are just arbitrarily excommunicated. Oh, they're not good enough for us. That's a major responsibility on any religion and their leaders who cause the hardship of relocating continents, countries in the case of Spain. Most would have stayed in Europe, probably all. But nevertheless, it's major. And the pressure is massive. And I don't really think that Bruce Hales and the Brethren hierarchy understand the psychological pressure that they're putting people through. I've just heard this morning, very sadly, despite the joy of being in Minorca, that Timmy Napier of Wagga Wagga has just taken his life. He told the Brethren that he wanted to leave. My heart goes out to the parents. Gordon and Alva, I think they were called. I just grieve for them, and this is an appeal that these deaths are taken seriously, very seriously. There have been many deaths, very serious deaths, in the history of the Brethren, and I've put it on certain brethren in Doncaster, England, to look into the death of Josh Manson, because that occurred just at the time that I was being shut up, and that was because of the fact that the then Sheffield brethren, who later became Doncaster, were sufficiently incensed by my response to a plea for help from a couple in their place, because of the pressure they were under, the psychological pressure they were under from the brethren. Oh yes, from the brethren, from the family. And so I just dived in to help. I was told by the brethren to go and see a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist was actually very sympathetic. She actually told me, she says, Lance, you're a bit like a St. Bernard's dog. Oh, thanks. Yeah, I said, why? She says, because you dive in to help people and aren't concerned about the people you scratch on the way in. So that was a kind thing to say, but yeah, so I'm a St. Bernard's dog. But I just want to be there to help people, whether they're Leeds, Doncaster, Worcester, Manchester, Nottingham, Leicester. I'm not bothered. But of course the brethren are very bothered, because they have this very strict rule that you must not interfere in other places' administration. And you cannot go and help somebody unless you've got authorisation from the man of God in Sydney. Well, what if he's in bed? I've got to ring him and say, Mr. Hales, can I go and help so-and-so? They're in desperate straits. Apparently it's okay if they are in your own locality. So if I was in Leeds, but then I was told I couldn't help. I was given a strict instruction from Garth Christie and Roger Edwards from Brussels that I must not have any part in administration. So that meant I couldn't help anybody. I was just to be sit there in a meeting, I suppose, in a Leeds meeting, and do nothing. Just be a parasite, basically. Anyway, I'm keeping up my calling, you might say, despite all that, and I'm here to help people. And I trust that if there's any young person, old person, any person in the brethren who's feeling under a lot of pressure and stress, that they're brave enough to reach out to me now, because I'm here to help. Not that I can help, it's the Lord's help. I'll just put you in touch with the Lord, but practically people need help, especially when they're under a lot of psychological pressure. The suicides amongst the brethren must stop. There are many, 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 many I've heard about since I left that I was told nothing about when I was in there. And I have got a whole compilation of suicides galore amongst the brethren, going back many years, which, again, I heard nothing about when I was in the brethren. So these things are hushed. I heard of a young brother who I knew a little that tried to commit suicide, but it was averted. He didn't actually commit suicide. So, of course, the authorities tend to hand these poor souls back into these lovely brethren who portray themselves as the caring community, who look after and never cause any anxiety or stress. And so, of course, the authorities can be hoodwinked into divesting themselves of responsibility by handing over to a religion that sets itself up to be caring in every aspect of life. We care for your soul, we care for your business, we care for your family, we care for your everything. That's what they say. Well, I've not experienced that too much myself, I must admit. I'm not complaining. I make the most of a difficult situation, but there are many out there who haven't got the psychological capacity to cope with the pressure. So they're taking lives. I say many, hopefully not too many, but enough for me to raise a big cause for alarm. So to get on to my subject is to banish fear and stand up for our rights. We've got to banish fear. Fear is in the mind. Fear is created. Fear is manufactured, often by people who have not got your best interest in mind, because they want you to be fearful of the consequences of going against a system or against a person. Well, that can't be right, can it? And that's something I want to look into. I've just been reading a book by Naomi Klein called The Shock Doctrine, which goes over the tactics that are used to interrogate people, the torture tactics and that sort of thing. And although that includes a fair amount of physical, which we would not, no one would get away with in a religion, of course, we hope that it wouldn't anyway, there is the whole aspect of psychological torture. And the state of shock that can be deliberately created because we're not complying. People can exploit shock caused by crises. Of course, it's always a major crisis if you are shut up or excommunicated by the brethren. Well, what I'm concerned about is that is exploited by unscrupulous people who are not representing Christ at all. They're representing something else. And I'm against any form of causing shock, because it disorientates people. It affects their minds. They can't think straight. They lose their sense of reason and ability to analyse what's going on, let alone articulate a response or a plea that people under the instructions of a leader would be risking their lives if they listened to. So you can become, get yourself into a position of what's no less than psychological torture, quite frankly. And this is a way that tyrants suppress self-expression, suppress personality, suppress free speech, suppress whistleblowers who are doing a good job in drawing attention to matters that they feel sincerely and genuinely about. So surely we need to address this problem in world, certainly in religion today, and work around any defence from religions that they are beyond reproach because they're shielded from the law because of freedom of religion. That cannot be if there is any abuse or any injustice going on. So just to keep on with the theme, any relentless campaign to wear people down so that they're physically, emotionally and psychologically exhausted can't be right. And any technique to torture people is completely unethical, and wrong and can never be justified. So we need to be building people up and encouraging people rather than destroying them. You can't be doing both at once. You might pretend you are. We cannot have people saying that you're running away from your responsibilities. You're not looking after your family when they are in fact preventing you from taking up your responsibilities, preventing you from being with your family. You can't have people saying you're going around womanizing when you're not going around womanizing. You've got to have a system of fairness and truth where people, and especially leaders, are accountable to others so that the truth, and nothing but the truth, is told. My father was withdrawn from, and with the devastating consequences that I was had to leave my family. He was withdrawn from by the brethren for the spirit of lying. That was the issue. Of course, I raised questions about it. When I was so fearful that I didn't raise any questions until the time he died. And then I rang the leader's son, Bruce Hales. John Hales was the leader at that time, and just said, hey, my father was withdrawn from for the spirit of lying. I couldn't pronounce judgment because I'd been in trouble, potentially, as going against the ruling of my local brethren in Leeds, who had decided and said amen in assembly in September 1972 that my father was no longer worthy of fellowship for the spirit of lying. Of course, the whole thing was construed against him to get him out of fellowship because he was a threat. He was a problem. He was the kindest man on earth. I used to hang over the handrails at home, listening to him, comforting brethren who came to him with their troubles, with their calamities. And he was the kindest man you can imagine. Far kinder than Bruce Hales and all these leaders, far kinder. And yet he was serving the brethren right up to the time when he was excommunicated. Completely disorientated him, his wife, who was withdrawn from as well for going to see somebody else who'd been withdrawn from. And the whole thing was ostensibly put right in the Brethren Assembly after I raised it, but the whole thing's still happening. So how good's that? They're not getting down. The brethren are not getting down to the root cause of the problem. And to be honest, I'm no saint. I don't class myself as anything special, but I'm not worthy of excommunication. I've confessed my sins. He's faithful and righteous to forgive us our sins. And the brethren have construed things against me that are just fabricated. They're untrue. And I know it before the Lord. I wouldn't be prepared to go public and say this if I was kidding. I don't believe in telling lies. But Father taught me from knee height that never to tell lies. And he was absolutely right. In fact, we're born with a sense of right and wrong, aren't we? A sense of justice. The smallest kid knows and cries if they're not being treated right or being treated unfairly. Well, we know in adulthood. We know. And that's why we should protest and stand up for our rights and be brave to stand against all this intimidation. It's torture. It's psychological torture. And it's got to stop. It certainly has. So isolation, physical isolation is utterly disorientating. You feel utterly disorientated, let's put it that way, if you're isolated from your friends, from your family. And if they say prior to that, over a couple of years or 3, that you're mental anyway, how can they possibly isolate you from your whole support system? That is most definitely a form of psychological torture. And in these torture camps, I was speaking about Naomi Klein, who's exposed it very capably. They literally separate prisoners so they cannot talk to each other. Well, that's what they do. They separate these religions that excommunicate. They excommunicate so arbitrarily that you're not allowed to talk to any of your previous friends. So overnight, you're in an abyss. You're like in a dark place, in a bad place. So it needs a tremendous presence of mind to cope with that. And there are thousands upon thousands that this has happened to in the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church. And my father, it happened to my mother. And the whole family was, the effects remain to this day, the disorientation in the family that occurs through arbitrary excommunication. Now, if somebody doesn't want to be in their religion and turns their back and creates a massive trouble, is causing utter upheaval and standing up in church and making unnecessary protests and causing disruption, I understand it to a certain extent, but even then you try and help the person and work with them to calm them down and let them see reason and negotiate and try and communicate with the person and give them fair chance. But no, these are lovely people. I look back in the platform of ministers in 1959 in Central Hall, London, where the Brethren's Universal Meetings were, and the large part of them were excommunicated arbitrarily without any, when they were lovely people. They didn't have any say. They didn't have opportunity to present their case. Cal was taking the meetings, G.R. Cal in 1959, and he was dubbed as rival, pushed out of fellowship. There was no righteous basis for that at all. I've looked into the matter closely. None at all. And it's going right, it's gone right through for 60 years and more to today, and it's got to stop. It must stop. We can't use religion as a tool to hurt and destroy people and destroy families, destroy lives, and cause suicides consequently. And don't try and tell me that people in the Brethren that have committed suicide has nothing to do with the Brethren. Take another look. It most certainly is. And I might be in all sorts of trouble legally from Bruce Hales and Garth Christie and these tough brethren who use the law very arbitrarily against members who speak the truth. But they need to start looking inside themselves and deciding that they need to change their whole system radically to prevent fear, so that people feel home and they can express their feelings, they can express their anxieties, they can express their frustrations, and there's a ready ear and understanding and an atmosphere created where there's no penalty for just pouring your heart out and expressing exactly how you feel. So that's what I'm after. You know, there was good things happened. I think it was around about 1988. The American government paid massive compensation to victims of brainwashing and torture. And I think the Brethren need to consider that. There's a lot of compensation needed to unnecessary exposure and torture, psychological torture, of ex-members. And they've kind of moved the discriminated against the ex-members and put them into a group of, oh, spectacles, don't ever go there. Oh, if you ever join that lot, you're finished. You're down the gutter. You're going to hell, you know, and that sort of inference that if you leave the Brethren, you're on the route to hell, although they don't quite say it to your face. That's the whole aim, is to strike fear to those remaining inside. Oh, he's lost his business. Just beware. You might be running a good business in the Brethren, and you might suddenly, like happened to me, be told that your business is going down the nick and you have to go, and we're going to take your business over to save it, and we're going to manipulate your children and your wife to do it who don't know anything like as much as you do. It's a very vulnerable position to be in. So this is a warning shot. And, you know, what we've got is wealth is being transferred to the very people who created the crisis in the first place. And as Naomi Klein says, the shock of crisis is an opportunity for unscrupulous people to come in, wheel in with their systems, and sweep up people who are devastated. and don't know which way to turn. And it's truly shocking. And surely we need to analyse history, and that should teach us that health, peace and justice are what should prevail at a time of crisis, and it should be demonstrated in a way whereby the leadership are answerable. And if they're not doing it, if they continue to carry on, we need to go out there and make them do it. Be brave. Understanding history is a good way to overcome disorientation and fear. When you look at the big picture, the struggles of humanity over many years, the struggles of religion, the struggles of imposition of new doctrines like separation, physical separation by the brethren in 1959, and the devastation that wrought through the 60s, and the culmination of that era in 1970, as far as the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church are concerned, or exclusive brethren, you actually find your place in the long human struggle. It's a long story. So understanding history, and we used to be told that the devil has a few tricks in his bag and he brings them out. Well, that's pretty much it, isn't it? If we're able to assess the tactics and the strategies that bad people, or the devil as we call it, uses, we can then become wise and as to his tactics, and start to take measures to stop ourselves becoming victims to underhand, devious, manipulative tactics. And I'm sure my father, who was a victim, matters weren't put right with him in the PBCC church until 4 or 5 years after he died. And he never enjoyed any sense of being forgiven by the very people who had thrust him out. Of course, the brethren used to comfort me by saying, "Oh, the Lord will tell him in heaven." But that's you have to be very, very, very spiritual, if that's the right word, to believe that, or very sure that he's already alive in heaven with the Lord. And it was a way to fob me off and pacify me, I suppose, because what could you argue when someone said that? I mean, if they say these things are going on in heaven, and the leaders do, and those in charge in a religion, if you say, "Oh no, I don't believe it," your whole belief structure may be jeopardised. I was already, as it was, I don't know why, my brother Garth called me a heretic, and then shut me up the same day as he called me that. Barged in and with another guy called Roger Edwards, and went to the meeting and got all the brethren to agree to shut me up, and had to leave home and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, I don't want to talk about myself. I just want to say that cults that magnify and amplify their wealth and a sense of fear by getting power over lives of unsuspecting congregation members are nothing more than bullies. And they're making, especially, and when you find out they're making millions and billions of dollars out of that, you realise that there's something pretty corrupt there that needs eradicating if the position is going to be saved. Simple as that. And, you know, if they want to destroy our families and destroy our lives and destroy our health consequently, whether it be mental or physical, and there are all sorts of rules and regulations. When I was a boy, I wasn't allowed to play sport, never learnt the cricket. I'm trying to learn a bit of cricket now in my 60s, and hey, learning a bit of batting, quite enjoying it. But I was just not allowed to do that sort of thing because they're so sure they're right. So, and you might say, well, why didn't you step out at the age of 15 or 14 and play cricket? You've no idea. The fear, the pressure on you to comply, the fear of, you know, as a 14-year-old, imagine if I'd had to leave my house, my home, because I wanted to insist on cricket. I was far too arbitrary with my own son, Yal, who was dead keen on football and wanted to play for Leeds United. And of course, his personality was suppressed and I played my part in it. But I was being compliant to the leadership of the religion, as imposed from the universal leader through the national leaders into the local place where I was. And so you realise you're in a cult because you have to do what you're told or else. And so that hovering fear is there, although you don't analyse it when you're inside. I can't believe that nobody stood up and protested when I was withdrawn from, because I hadn't really done anything wrong. But I can believe it because people are fearful for their own skins. If you stood up and say, don't think Lance should be withdrawn from, when the leaders of these, you know, of this religion say that I should be, it's a perilous situation to be in. It's fear again. So I'm suggesting that we banish fear and do the right thing, regardless of consequences, and go by your conscience, and the Lord will step in for you. The Lord will stand by you if you do what's right. If you're a believer, if you've got faith, test the Lord out in that, speaking reverently. Test out the truth. Make a stand. So, a little bit of US history. Franklin Roosevelt said a very made a very profound remark, I think after the First World War, when things were heading up towards the Second World War. He said that the only thing that we have to fear is fear itself. And at that point of time, people were completely disillusioned, especially in Europe, and the Germans were faced with the choice of communism or fascism, and their financial situation was perilous. There was all sorts of, they were vulnerable, they were in shock, and consequently the crisis that was brewing in Europe provided scope for fear, and for fear and control. And, you know, the weapon of authoritarian control is always fearful, is always fear, as opposed to Christ, who's so different. The hymn, I've mentioned it before, ye fearful saints, fresh courage take, the clouds ye so much dread are big with mercy and shall break in blessings on your head. So the fear that you dread, no, see it differently, get a new perspective, it's mercy. And as you confront the fear, the dread goes, and you find mercy. So let's step over the line, let's be brave, and let's prove Christ amongst all this corporate totalitarian stuff that's going on, and people with big egos standing tall and pretending that they are little gods, if you like, and they've got the right to tell you what to do, and you'll be safe if you listen to me. Oh, I didn't find that amongst the Plymouth Brethren Christian Church, nor did my father. But another thing in history, Hermann Goering, who I'm sure we've all heard of, one of Hitler's right-hand men, was asked how he managed to get tolerant, because the Germans are tolerant, educated as well, Germans, to be obedient slaves to a system that committed some of the worst atrocities in history. You know what he said? That's that simple. He said, the job of the government is to get the people in fear. And if you keep them in fear, you can get them to do whatever you want them to do. And they turn into sheep. Ba ba. Yes sir, 3 bags full, sir. Heil Hitler. Ha ha. And people adulate a man and they eat out of his hands, and they haven't got any capacity to see, to analyse whether the man is promulgating evil or good. They follow a man. And that is what Roosevelt could see was happening and building up. And of course it led to the Second World War, all the destruction and devastation that occurred there. So authoritarian elements in society today tend to use, manipulate wealthy individuals and crises, especially when crises occur, to shift wealth upwards so that the top men or the top family become extremely wealthy at the expense of the poor. And then they clamp down a totalitarian control, whereby people are fearful to protest because they're fearful of being litigated against. So the legal system, the police system, and the authoritarian system in the church is all utilised to strike fear into unsuspecting members. And it's an effective method. But of course, you say, well, how do these people get in the first place? Because they'll never vote for people that are going to give corporations and families, rich families, even more rich, even more power, and reduce people's rights to expression. Well, because they paint a different picture. They're not being honest. They paint it, and of course, when Bruce Hales came into power in 2002 and 3, he instituted what was called the Review, and he endeared himself to us because he was appearing such a kind man by going to see people who had been excommunicated by previous leaders and saying, you can come back into this wonderful fellowship. Well, of course, those that asked questions weren't answered. Why did you put me out in the first place? No answer. They can't say anything against the leader of the day, which was Jim Taylor or J.H. Simonton. So they have to, rather than engage in real dialogue, in-depth dialogue with the victims of their system, they have to keep the system going. So it means that the whole thing is false. And the real reason as to why people were excommunicated in the first place is never faced. And that's the situation that happened. I got a statement from the Brethren, written out, a copy from the Brethren, from one brother in the Leeds Assembly called Brian Hanson, saying that the Brethren have acknowledged in the Assembly that it was wrong to withdraw from James Christie and stay with my mother Stella Christie. Well, that's all they do. There's no compensation. You carry on in this system, and we'll carry on excommunicating people. They didn't tell me then they were going to excommunicate me, but they excommunicated one of my sons soon after, overthrowing my father's judgment very soon after. So the system was going on. The system needs changing. And I'm not saying it's beyond redemption. I'm saying that the Brethren need to change from being punishers and holding people in fear to being forgivers and setting people up, healing people, setting them up as though they'd never sinned, just like the Lord does. And the other thing that we need to remember, which is quite serious, is that these systems can do whatever they can get away with to hide what they're doing. That means they're getting away with anything they want to do, anything they like to do. So that, and they have to conceal information, so there's no power in the people. The power's all in the hands of the leadership, of the hierarchy, and the people play meetings and go to meetings and talk about scripture, but there's no power in their hands to influence anything, and that's a serious state to be in. So a system that controls the propaganda and controls the ministry, so that people are not able to talk about their grievances, about what they can't understand, is clearly dodgy. We've all got certain fundamental human rights. First being the freedom of expression. You should be free in any healthy environment to express yourself. And help comes in as people are honest and open about their feelings. We should have a jury, some sort of jury trial system, whereby if you've got a grievance, you know there's a fair court, a fair hearing, a level playing field, so to speak. I had a situation over 2 or 3 years before I was shut up, 4 years, where I was trying to help a couple of guys in the Brethren, Jim Hutchinson and Ray Story. And many times I'd ask my local priests, well, let's get them up, let's get round the table, let's get their priests, them, and resolve this. They would never do that. They didn't want a resolution. Looking back, they clearly wanted me to submit to their system or push me out of fellowship. There was no scope for me to be free and say what I thought. There was no scope for me to help these people who, if they're true to what they said at the time, will still say, and they're probably too fearful to say it, but Jim and Ray will still say that I was only trying to help, I was only doing the right thing. And I do believe that there should be accountability and fairness, and we shouldn't hide under the guise of religion unfairness or unkindness or punishment, hardship, manipulation, deceit, lies. So we're all also, a human right we've got is a right to privacy. If things have to come out, well, that's done in confidence. And there's certainly no scope to have a system that spies on you and keeps information from you. If there's any schooling system that's deliberately excluding certain subjects from their students, the motive of that needs to be looked at very closely by independent parties, not the religion that runs the schools, most certainly not. It could just be that children are being taught a certain way so that they never even think about leaving. So that would be brainwashing, wouldn't it? If you actually are born into a religion and it's assumed that you will never change from that religion, so they don't know about any other religion in any depth, where's the fairness in that? Where's the ability to judge? How can you decide whether your religion stacks up against another religion? Maybe the Church of England or Baptists. So it's only since I was 60 that I've started looking at other religions, and here's some very good people. I've got the word of God in other churches. I've not been to many at all, just a handful. But God's not limited. He can come into any congregation. I believe that, he can get into the Brethren Church, the PBCC. I'm sure his word comes in there. I'm sure, I preached in there. I wasn't allowed to preach in the end, although I did. I preached actually in Kilmarnock just about 3 weeks before I was shut up, and took a reading in Glasgow. And I'm sure that, not that I would claim anything, I'm sure that I was speaking what the Spirit wanted me to speak. I don't want to claim too much, but I had a sense at times I'd make a fairly straight remark in a meeting, maybe about honesty and lies. We had a guy called Phil Hutchinson up taking an extended meeting in Leeds, and I asked him about, I can't remember what it was, just hitting home the prophetic word. If a man isn't honest and he's carrying on as though all is sweetness and light, it's right that a shaft should come in. That's what prophets did in Scripture, in the history. A prophet will be in the prophetic word like a shaft. And as one of the leaders of the brethren said, if the cap fits, wear it. But hey, we're here to look, if we're going to judge people, judge ourselves. Improve ourselves through taking the word home and applying it and finding that I've got things in my heart that are not suitable, not in line with the Spirit of Christ, the teachings of Christ, and deal with them so I can move on improved. If I find unkindness, which I'm sure we all do from time to time in our hearts, well, we can deal with that and become kinder people. And I'm sorry, but all this withdrawal and punishment and nastiness occurs amongst the brethren cannot come from a kind heart. There's just no way it can be reconciled. Either that or those promulgating the punishment haven't got hearts themselves. They're narcissists or sociopaths. They don't understand the suffering that they're causing, the psychological suffering. I'd like to put it down to ignorance, but I can't, because there's so much carnage in this group that that I cannot put it off to ignorance. There's definitely intent. If families have been broken up, that just doesn't happen by mistake. That's intended. And severe, strong questions need to be asked as to what's motivating these people who seem to want to defame people as rival or opposers, when all they're seeking to do is to do the work of Christ. So I don't want to go on, but we should not use, systems should not use the police and other forces to cause oppression. And there are lots of questions I'd like the answers to, and I'm going to be brave enough to ask them, and I trust that the leadership of the brethren will see the advantage in exposing these videos to their brethren, so the brethren can decide for themselves whether I'm being genuine or not. I don't want to claim anything, but I'm just Lance Christie, and I did at times raise questions in the Brethren Church which weren't liked, but had to be answered. I asked a question about advocacy, for instance, and because I think that's a great principle. Oh no, Garth answered, advocacy is not for lawless people. In other words, Lance, you're lawless, so we're not going to advocate for you. Well, it is for lawless people, it's for sinners. The gospel is that Christ reached into our sinful state. He didn't advocate for us after we'd started getting good. He reached right into our circumstances, right into our condition, and saved us. And that's advocacy in my book. And reconciliation is when we had nothing worth reconciling in us. That's the whole principle of reconciliation is a wonderful one. So the thing is, we want leadership, leading in the things of Christ, reflecting the work of Christ. We don't want bullying. Nobody wants bullying. And we have a right to answer straightly, even to leadership, without being vilified as conspiracy theorists, or vilified as being opposers, or vilified as being whatever you want to call it, whatever they can dream up, sowing discords and all that, to make the brethren shudder in fear because, I don't want to be like that. So we need to fight, really, to reclaim our rights from these villains who have tried to steal them from us. And these are rights that are founded in the work of Christ. You know, Christ would expect us to be bold in standing up for rights, which are his rights, really. We tend to get muddled. Our human rights, yes, but they reflect exactly what Christ preached in Scripture. And he set out all these virtues that the whole human right system or legislation is founded on. So we cannot have people getting rich under doctrines of separation, for instance, being the same people who are censoring any criticism of separation. That's clear, isn't it? That would be wrong and is happening and must stop. You either abolish separation and then invite commenting, but you cannot censor people. And I believe, from what I've picked up, it was actually the Hales brothers, that's the father of the current leader, and his uncle Bruce, who worked with Jim Taylor to bring in physical separation in 1959. It was then used as a tool to get control of Brethren's businesses during the time of the commercial system, which Jim Taylor exposed in 1965. I've got the notes of a reading in New York the week before the Hales brothers were withdrawn from, under Jim Taylor's instructions by the Brethren in Sydney, in October 1965 care meeting, and he condemns the commercial system no less than 30 times. Well, the current leader's not, he's rewriting history, he's not talking about that, but they're facts. They were published by the Brethren printing house at the time. So he's got to start facing up to reality. He's got to start facing up to facts. And the facts are that the Hales brothers, his father and uncle, introduced corruption into the assembly. And they were defrauding depot funds. That's the publishing house of the Brethren, BGT now. And they were withdrawn from for it. And now they're back with a vengeance in the form of Son and his sons and his brothers and all these. And I think intimidating the Sydney Brethren and the Brethren into accepting them as leaders, or else the Haleses are in control, you know. And but let's have everybody's. Let's have your reasons. Bring them out. Don't shut me. Don't excommunicate people for raising these questions. I think they need to. I'm hoping that this will be a watershed, and the Brethren will now start stepping forward and being brave. And you know, nobody's got the right to tell me what I can't debate. You've got a right to debate. I've got a right to debate. And we should force Bruce Hales to the table so we can debate these matters with him, man to man, with respect. It's disrespectful the way he condemns people, you know, calls me mental, you know, and persuaded my family I was mental, my wife I was mental, so sent me to the doctors with my wife and told me to shut up and let her do the talking. Well, sorry, Mr. Hales, it's not the way to go, and there's a blatant lack of respect there. And these men want everyone polarised and fragmented, because they know that if we get together, we're all going to be asking the same questions, and that will be a big problem to them. So they're trying to oppress us, so that to rob us of our freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly and what we do in assembly, and all of the freedoms that give dignity to humanity. So stay educated, stay informed, and if you're not, become educated, become informed, so that you know all about the system that you are, or the testimony that you are so strongly defending and protecting. Because we need people who are not scared of debate. Leaders are terrified of debate. If your view is different to mine, please call me. I want to hear it. If that was the spirit of the leader, that would be great, because he would welcome me at his house. I've been to his house 7 times. He will not open the door to me. he'll send legal letters to me. What good is that? So we want self-governance, really, consciences to triumph and work. And this is to save human dignity from a totalitarian cartel that is trying to rob decent humans of their freedom. It's got to stop, and it'll stop as soon as you join me and rise up against it. And not in a punishing way, but in a way where we get the facts on the table, and Bruce Hales can then answer up to his local brethren in Sydney, and they can do what they want, forgive him if they like. But we need the truth on the table, and we need the motives. We need Hales to be a man, come forward, be honest, state why he's done what he's done to me and others. If it's because of his love of money, as he felt he wanted to steal my business away from me to add to his empire, well, come on, Hales, be honest about it. It'll catch up with you in the end. Your bubbles, God has a way of letting bubbles expand until they're over. You know, we thought they were going to burst long ago, but eventually they do burst. And the longer we wait before they burst, the bigger the bang. So come on, Hales, get on with it. Thank you.